In the quarter century or so before the Civil War, landscape painting was America's national art. It expressed America's national purpose more completely and more compellingly than any other subject. And it attracted America's best artistic talents. Among them, one stood out above all the others. About 50 miles south of Albany, on a rise overlooking the Hudson River as it flows southward to New York City, Frederic Edwin Church made his home. This part of the Hudson River Valley was sacred ground, sanctified by 2 generations of landscape painters, including Church himself, for whom no other place quite so perfectly defined the natural and national image of America. Olana, as Church named his house, is itself a work of art. As much a reflection of the mind of its maker and of the age in which it was made as his paintings. Church built this house in the 1870s as his permanent home where several generations of his family would live. The decorative elements were designed by Church and reflect his study of Persian architecture, as well as his own imagination. It was, he said, Persian in style, adapted to the climate and requirements of modern life. Crowning the hill, the house is a personal vision of the civilized world in harmony with nature. Here on the loggia of Olana, we can see what drew Church to just this place, the splendid and panoramic view down the Hudson River to the south. And even more magnificent, a view to the west, across the river, of the Catskill Mountains. A view in all of American landscape that was the most classic, the most perfectly beautiful and deeply meaningful. The Catskills, someone wrote, were a rare nursery of landscape art. Their enormous effect on American artists was largely the achievement of one man, Church's teacher, Thomas Cole. In the Catskills, Cole discovered the form and meaning of a national landscape. The wild, seemingly limitless landscape of sunny morning on the Hudson, seen in fresh, bright morning light, as at the dawn of a creation and still steaming in its newness, is precisely such a landscape, imbued with national meaning. In a series of paintings of the 1820s, with astonishing quickness, Cole developed not only his own personal artistic language, but the essential features of a distinctly American landscape style. Cole made American landscape paintable, gave it legible and articulate meaning. And by pictorial means, broken trees, sudden contrasts of light and dark, storms, he made landscape a forcefully experienced dramatic event. Above all, Cole established the wilderness as a metaphor for America. But Cole aspired to a higher form of art than that, as he said, of a mere leaf painter. So he began to paint historical or historicized landscapes, in which the subject was developed in pairs or in series of paintings to make the meaning as explicit as possible. In The Departure, a troop of knights and soldiers rides off to war. The Return, in Cole's words, shows a mournful procession, all that war had spared of the once goodly company. Cole used nature's seasons and moods to underscore the meaning of his narratives. He set The Departure in the morning and early summer, The Return in the evening and in autumn. Church studied with Cole at his home in Catskill, directly across the river, for 2 years, from 1844 to 1846. In some way or other, Cole's influence touched most of the artists of Church's generation. But as Cole's pupil, Church was the only one to receive that influence directly. Church was very close to Cole, and he was in turn greatly admired by his teacher. Church was a more naturally gifted painter. So Cole taught Church not so much how to paint, but what to paint. He helped form Church's mind, not his hand, his vision, not his style. While he was Cole's pupil, Church showed his understanding of Cole's landscape vocabulary, the elements from nature and the devices of art that Cole used repeatedly for expressive and symbolic effect. Among the younger generation of artists born about 1825, others also felt Cole's influence. Jasper Cropsey's Spirit of War is one of a pair of paintings clearly indebted to Cole's historical vision, to his narrative form, and to his style, particularly the dramatic contrasts of light and dark. Cole died unexpectedly in 1848, and the measure of his extraordinary influence can be seen in works of art that honored his memory. Kindred Spirits, by Asher B. Duran, is a memorial to Cole. Cole, with sketchbook, stands beside his most famous literary counterpart, the poet William Cullen Bryant, on a ledge in the Catskills, the place that Cole did so much to sanctify and that served as his most fitting memorial. Church understood Cole's artistic purpose, the essential meaning of his artistic enterprise, as none of his contemporaries did. Church's paintings, his early paintings in particular, of course, show Cole's influence. But Church's most ambitious early work, called Hooker and Company, Journeying Through the Wilderness from Plymouth to Hartford in 1636, is remarkable not for its similarities to Cole in style and interpretation, but for its differences. Cole's history was generalized in time and moralizing in content. Church's painting depicts an actual historical occurrence and one from American history. The migration of the Hooker Party, an early example of the westward movement in America, is a premonition of the central theme that Church, painter for the era of manifest destiny, would dwell on in his maturity. Seemingly a simple, rural landscape, this is in fact also an historical painting, depicting the place where Captain Joseph Wadsworth hid the charter of the Connecticut colony to avoid its being seized by agents of the king. In paintings such as these, Church is adapting the lessons from Cole to his own sensibility and to the expectations of his age. Church was born in Hartford, Connecticut. His ancestor, Richard Church, was a member of Thomas Hooker's party at the founding of Hartford. These paintings, then, are not only about the nation's history, they're also about personal history. Church's artistic development and professional advancement were extraordinarily rapid. When he was just 19 and still Cole's pupil, he made his debut at the annual exhibition of the National Academy of Design. 4 years later, he was made a full member of the Academy, the youngest in the country. And in that year, too, he painted and exhibited one of his most beautiful early paintings, West Rock, New Haven, a painting in which he first appears as a fully independent and mature artistic personality. West Rock is the place where two fugitives who opposed the English crown hid to avoid capture. Although this too is a history painting, its quietly restrained vision of pastoral beauty, its limpid purity and crisp, precise description of nature are impossible to mistake for Cole's. By linking the distinctive features of American landscape to events of the historic past, in West Rock, Church created his first fully successful national landscape. But another painting, one less perfect perhaps, but of greater ambition, New England Scenery of 1851, marked the end of his early period and of his indebtedness to Cole. Unlike other early works by Church, this is a composite, invented landscape, not the depiction of a single place, but the concentrated evocation of New England scenery. Although it looks back to Cole's narrative works, it doesn't deal with the past, but with the present and the future, with New England as a generative center from which settlers move out to settle the West. The painting suited the mood of America at mid-century. Here we see, for the first time in mature form, Church in his role as the interpreter of America, in the age when Americans believed it was their destiny, their sacred and divine duty, to settle the new land. Church painted the great icons of this missionary age. Here, a settler's cabin by the lake, surrounded with cattle and tree stumps, is another image of manifest destiny. Church became increasingly interested in natural history. Mount Katahdin, Maine's highest mountain, has been described as primeval, the fresh and natural surface of the planet Earth. Church's juxtaposition of this relic of nature's past with a civilized foreground is an especially American reading of natural history, one in which nature's purpose and America's destiny were one and the same thing. Church's deep interest in natural history is reflected in books still found here in his library at Olana. Particularly important for Church were the works of the great German naturalist Alexander von Humboldt, one of the greatest explorers and scientific popularizers of the 19th century. Humboldt spent 5 years in South America. In his narrative of his South American travels and his monumental encyclopedic work, Cosmos, both translated into English by mid-century, here are Church's copies, Humboldt described a place where the evidence of natural history was to be found with a newness and freshness, a scope and abundance greater than anywhere else on Earth. In 1853, on a route that closely followed the course of Humboldt's expedition 50 years earlier, Church made his first trip to the tropics, his goal, the Andes Mountains of Ecuador. The pictures that resulted were greater in scope than anything Church had painted before, and set a new dimension for landscape painting. They depicted a landscape of a magnitude, of a scale and natural abundance so great that they've been described as earthscapes rather than mere landscapes. Church was beginning the wide-ranging travels that would become an essential part of his creative process. In 1857, he made a second trip to South America, and in the same year, he also finished his first definitive painting of a North American subject. of the North American subject. Niagara itself, a contemporary wrote, is the grand, central, characteristic object of American scenery, the majestic symbol of unceasing life and irresistible progress. With nothing in the foreground but the subject itself, the viewer stands in an immediate relationship to the painting and to the grand meanings that it doesn't so much depict as enact. The experience was so immediate, someone said, that all that was lacking was the cataract's roar. But even this, it was suggested, might be supplied by the noise on Broadway. Everyone in New York flocked to see it, and Niagara was said to be the finest oil picture ever painted on this side of the Atlantic. At age 31, Church had established himself as the most important landscape painter in America. Then, with images from his second South American trip still fresh in his mind, he undertook an even more ambitious painting. He had moved into the 10th Street studio building, where in the spring of 1859, his most famous painting was presented to the New York public as a single picture exhibition. It was an almost theatrical event. The lighting carefully controlled, the space in which the beholder stood darkened so that the picture seemed to exist as a view through a window or on a stage. The Heart of the Andes was the most splendid example of Humboldtian landscape in its subject, but also in the way it was made. It's a summary, comprehensive landscape, a synthetic assembly of the full range of South American scenery, given the authority of fact by the astonishing precision with which everything in it is described. During the exhibition, pamphlets were available interpreting the picture. One of them, written by Church's close friend Theodore Winthrop, tells what the painting meant and was meant to do. All the earth's riches, Winthrop wrote, are compacted into one many-sided crystal. Symbols of passion and of peace face each other. We can see at once what the world is worth. The Heart of the Andes is in itself an education in art, both a delight and a lesson. Over 12,000 people paid 25 cents each to see the painting during the first month it was shown in New York. It was purchased that year for $10,000, the highest price ever paid for the work of a living American artist, and was subsequently shown in cities in the United States and abroad, greeted everywhere with extravagant praise. At this time also, Church met Isabel Carnes, and within a year they were married. Church was now at the height of his career. He would continue to paint the tropical landscapes that made him famous, but his next major pictures were emphatically North American. The Icebergs was the product of a trip along the coasts of Newfoundland and Labrador in 1859. Similar in size to the Heart of the Andes, the Icebergs was its contrasting pendant, the heart of the Arctic, someone put it. The Icebergs marked northern limits, as his Andean paintings marked southern ones, to the artistic claim Church staked on the New World. But in 1860, he returned to its center and to the central subject of the New World landscape. Twilight in the Wilderness is one of the great wilderness landscapes, a painting that stood in relation to earlier depictions of the wilderness with the same perfection of form and content that Niagara bore to previous treatments of that subject, more impressive, more inclusive than any preceding it. Over an empty, untouched American landscape lies a solemn, brooding stillness, an almost apocalyptic mood in which revelation and premonition are mingled. Church couldn't have known that in less than a year, America would be engulfed in a terrible civil war. But there's no doubt that in this painting, he sensed the nation's mood and the disturbing portents of profound change. The war itself released the meanings inherent in many of Church's pictures. In Our Banner in the Sky, nature's nationality is made explicit and emblematic. Church enlisted a South American subject to deliver even grander reassurances of national survival and purpose. Cotopaxi is a great natural drama of the contest between light and darkness. The new risen sun penetrating the cloud of volcanic smoke, its reflection forming a cross in the landscape, is a metaphor of struggle and a sign of hope and salvation. Cotopaxi was exhibited in 1863, in the midst of the Civil War, at a time when, more than ever before, Americans could use the assurances of destiny and high purpose that it so lavishly supplied. The war affected Church as it did everyone else. But it wasn't the war itself, but its consequences, the ways in which it changed America, that had the most profound impact on Church. The Civil War utterly destroyed the America that Church had represented so faithfully and interpreted so intelligently. The post-war years began a new chapter in Church's art. His landscapes now have a very different mood. They now respond to his own life, not to the life of his time. The Vale of St. Thomas, painted after a trip to Jamaica, differs in mood from his earlier paintings. More a landscape of feeling than of ideas. In 1867, Church, the major artistic interpreter of the New World, visited the Old World. In Europe, in the Near East, Greece, the Holy Land, he painted the great sights not of natural, but of human history. Church was deeply impressed by the classical monuments he saw in Athens, particularly the Parthenon, regarded by many as the most perfect building of antiquity. In the Middle East, he painted sites hallowed in classical and biblical history, and reveries on the past, like Syria by the sea. In one of his last major works, he returned to a New World subject. Morning in the Tropics, painted in 1877, is a large painting, yet not a public one, not open and cosmic like Heart of the Andes, but private, introspective. During roughly the last 25 years of his life, Church's productivity diminished severely. Painfully crippled by arthritis, it became harder and harder for him to paint and to travel, which earlier had been virtually the same act. But these years also witnessed a wholesale rejection of everything Church's art stood for. A magnificent drop curtain was the way a critic described one of Church's large late landscapes in 1880. It was simply not painting. Fortunately, Church found in designing and decorating this house a creative enterprise that absorbed his thought and his energy throughout his later years. Church's travels in the Middle East greatly affected his ideas of what a house might be. The court hall is the central space, like houses he saw in Syria and Lebanon. The painted decoration adapted from Moorish and Persian designs. Rooms are filled with antique and artistic objects, European and Oriental ceramics. Church's own paintings intermingle with Middle Eastern metalware, pottery, and other curiosities gathered from around the world. The effect is not so much a Persian fantasy, as it's been called, but a fusion of styles and cultures, a grand assemblage of ideas and objects from East and West, a synthesis of civilizations. Church's final addition to Alanna was a studio, completed a few years before his death, connected to the court hall by a long gallery. He painted none of his important pictures here, none of the pictures that once made him the most celebrated artist in America. But it was an heroic and yet touching affirmation of his life as a painter. If there's a more personal, reflective note in his later paintings, Alanna is more tangible evidence of Church's inwardness. Once he covered the world, now he brought the world to him. About an hour this side of Albany, Church said in 1869, is the center of the world. I own it. It was no accident that Church settled here. That, too, was a reflective, reminiscent, inward-turning act. By returning to a region sanctified by a succession of American artists, but most importantly by his teacher, Thomas Cole, Church rooted himself in a place deeply saturated by associations with American landscape art. In that way, he declared his affiliation with it and with everything it once meant to America and still meant to him.